Thank you. I'm Lisa Edmiston, and I'm chair of the board of the Cancer Support Team Board of Directors. And on behalf of our board, our Luncheon Planning Committee, and the entire CST staff, I'd like to welcome you to the 20th Annual Gail K. Lee Health Awareness Luncheon. Thank you so much for joining us today. To begin the afternoon, Patty Vaughn, one of our amazing nurses, whom many of you know, will read the invocation. Patty?
Thank you. On this day, filled with the pursuit of knowledge and the joy of companionship, we bless this food at our table. We are grateful for all of you gathered here, cancer survivors, friends, families, caregivers, and healthcare professionals. We are reminded that in numbers, there is strength, there is courage, there is hope, there is caring, and someday there'll be a cure. Amen.
Cancer Support Team was founded in 1978 by Dr. Arnold Wald, a radiation oncologist, and Gail Lee, a nurse and patient advocate. We're the only Westchester-based home care program focusing solely on individuals and families affected by cancer that offers its services at no cost and without regard to insurance coverage. And I can't believe I'm reading this because I know that by heart, but our mission is to improve the quality of life for individuals and families affected by cancer at any stage of the disease. We do so by providing in-home nursing care and education, patient and family counseling, and case management, as well as transportation to treatment appointments through our wonderful volunteer drivers, one of whom is our Volunteer of the Year this year, and small financial assistance grants. CST is truly a unique organization, and we're thrilled to be celebrating our 40th anniversary this year. As all of our services are offered at no cost, it is only through your generosity that we are able to provide them. So thank all of you for being here today and for your support, which allows us to continue the amazing work our team does every day. It takes a village to make for a successful event, and I want to make sure to thank the many people who have made today's luncheon possible. First, our heartfelt thanks go out to our honorary co-chair, Mary Jane Aragoni. Unfortunately, she could not join us today, but her unending support of the luncheon and Cancer Support Team is deeply appreciated. I also want to recognize our silver sponsor, New York Presbyterian Lawrence Hospital, for their support. Next, to our luncheon co-chairs, Val Allen, Jean Meyerowitz, and Alice Latondo, and each and every member of our luncheon planning committee who dedicated countless hours to make this event a success. Finally, we're so fortunate to have special relationships with our amazing honorary committee, all cancer survivors, from whom we draw our inspiration to continue our work and to organize such powerful educational programs such as this luncheon. You are instrumental in keeping us grounded and focused. Would Val, Jean, our luncheon planning committee, and honorary committee members please stand so we may recognize you with a big round of applause. It would be remiss of me not to recognize the work of the Cancer Support Team staff and volunteers, not only for helping with this very important event, but for what you do each and every day to support the people living with cancer and loved ones that we serve. I'm so proud to be Executive Director of Cancer Support Team and an amazing organization. Thank you all so very much. Our raffle sellers will be coming around the tables later on, and during lunch you have booklets on your tables if you didn't get a chance to get tickets in the back. We do also take credit cards, so if you are looking to buy raffle tickets and don't have a check or cash, there's a table in the back that has that capability. So we'll be back in a little while to present the Volunteer of the Year Award, draw our raffles, and most importantly, introduce Dr. Chung and hear her speak about what's new in genetic testing and cancer. Thank you.
We are about to present the Volunteer of the Year Award, excuse me. Our Volunteer of the Year Award was created to honor the memory of Ruth Lowy, a volunteer driver for Cancer Support Team for 18 years and a longtime member of the Luncheon Planning Committee. She was also a member of Team CST, our team for Swim Across America. Ruth was a true friend of Cancer Support Team and to so many in this room. I am privileged to present this year's Volunteer of the Year Award to Pete Goldsmith. Pete became involved with CST because his wife was a patient and attended Patty Vaughan's ovarian cancer support group. Pete wanted to give back to the community and has been a volunteer driver for us since 2011. Pete also volunteers for New Haven Reads and serves on its board. In addition to his volunteer activities, he enjoys spending time with his children and 4 grandchildren. Thank you, Pete, for all you do for Cancer Support Team. Please accept this small token as a token of our sincere appreciation. And those of you, when you leave, you can look at our Volunteer of the Year Award plaque, which is in our office, but today is in the front with Pete's name on it already. Thank you again.
Hi all. We're going to continue with our program now. If I can ask our basket raffle sellers or raffle basket sellers to please do one last quick check with your tables and then give any of your tickets and your baskets to Monica so that we can pull the raffle tickets. While we're waiting for that, I'm going to move on and say that I'm certain you've all noticed the beautiful flower centerpieces in your tables. Those are designed by one of our committee members who could not be here today, Stephanie Picone, and Flowers by Stephanie. And we have a wonderful tradition of gifting those centerpieces to the person at the table whose birthday is the closest to our speakers. And I have to make sure I get this right because coincidentally enough, Wendy Chung, our speaker this year's birthday, is one day before Wendy Harpham, our speaker's last year's birthday. So I hope I have the right birthday, but October 16th? Okay, so if your birthday is closest to October 16th, please take the flowers at your table home and enjoy them. Okay. Moving on. Inside your programs that were on your chair, I'm sorry if I'm too loud. Oh, we're figuring out who got the flowers. So inside your programs are evaluations. Those are very important to us as they help give us important feedback on what you liked or didn't like about the luncheon, suggestions for people to add to the committee, the honorary committee, and also for if you have speaker suggestions or whatnot, or friends you'd like to have on the mailing list. So please be sure to fill those out. You can either leave them on the table. There will be a basket at the back of the room on the resource table, which is over back here, or one of our staff members will have a basket as you leave as well. If you haven't had a chance to check out the resource table, please do so. There's an example of some of the information about Cancer Support Team, but also there's a chemo comfort kit, which is something we give to our patients that's very useful. So it's a very interesting resource.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. This is probably one of the best things I do all year, so I'm happy to be here and glad to see so many familiar faces back again. I have the privilege of announcing Dr. Chung, and I have to say I had to work really hard to cull down some of her resume. I told her that I just cut out the things I couldn't pronounce. But there's a lot in there, so do read the bio, and you can find her on Wikipedia and a lot of other places too. But we at Cancer Support are thrilled and honored to have Dr. Wendy Chung, MD, PhD, here to speak with us today. As a clinical and molecular geneticist and physician, she currently directs the clinical genetics program at Columbia University and serves as the Kennedy Family Professor of Pediatrics. Dr. Chung received her BA in Biochemistry and Economics from Cornell University, her MD from Cornell University Medical College, and her PhD in Genetics from the Rockefeller University. She directs NIH-funded research programs in human genetics of breast cancer, pulmonary hypertension, autism, neurodevelopmental disorders, and birth defects. Currently, she leads the Precision Medicine Resource in the Irving Institute at Columbia University. As recipient of numerous awards, Dr. Chung is renowned for her teaching and mentoring and has received Columbia University's highest teaching award, the Presidential Award for Outstanding Teaching. And we just found out on November 1st, Dr. Chung is about to receive the Academy Medal for Distinguished Contributions in Biomedical Science from the New York Academy of Medicine. Congratulations. Try to say that 3 times fast, right? Dr. Chung is well known for her TED Talks with millions of views, and today will speak with us on what's new in genetic testing for cancer. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Wendy Chung.
Thank you so much for having me here today, and thanks to the organizers for inviting me. So how many people here either have had cancer themselves or have had someone in their family with cancer? Okay, I was going to say, maybe I should have gone the other way around. Is there anyone who hasn't themselves either had cancer or family member? Okay, so this is for you. Okay, so everyone needs to listen up now. So my goal in life is actually to get rid of cancer, to make it to the point where we don't have to worry about this, right? I would much rather also prevent cancer than have to treat cancer. And so part of what we try and do is think about what are the health threats that people have and how can we get in front of them? How can we get ahead of them? So whether it's for ourselves, whether it's for our brothers or sister, whether it's for our children or our grandchildren, try and use genetic information in a way to be able to prevent that. We also, though, realize that we're not quite there yet, and so we also have the goal for individuals who are diagnosed with cancer, making sure they get the right type of treatment, making sure they get the right type of treatment for their type of cancer in a customized way or in a precision way to try and minimize what we do to them in terms of the toxicities of our treatment and maximize what we do in terms of their therapies. And so within this, I know it's a little bit complicated, but we actually look at the genetic information from the tumor, because that tells us what we're treating, and we have to be able to figure that out. But we also look at the genetic information of the person to be able to understand for them what's unique about their particular body and the way it's responding either to cancer treatment or potentially cancers in the future. And so even for individuals who have had cancer, once is one time too many. But what I worry about is that some of those individuals might actually be at risk to have another cancer in the future. And for some of them, that other cancer might even be more deadly, more fatal, or more concerning. And so anyone who's had cancer in particular, I want you to listen very carefully. The reason I say listen carefully is that things are changing for my field, and they're changing really, really fast. And so for those of you who have either heard about genetic testing, or maybe even you or someone in your family had genetic testing in the past, if the past was more than 3 or 4 years ago, it's very old, and there may actually be reasons to get some updates or to think about what's new. So how many people know about Angelina Jolie? Who's heard about Angelina Jolie? Okay. So besides Angelina Jolie being extremely successful as an actress, how many people know about Angelina Jolie's family history of cancer? Right. So I actually have great admiration for Angelina because I think she did a remarkable thing in terms of being able to increase what I call the genomic literacy or understanding about people in the public. So I think many of you know already that in Angelina Jolie's family, her mother, her grandmother, her aunt, all 3 of them either had breast or ovarian cancer and died from those conditions. And she realized that. She realized that she did not want to follow her mother's footsteps in that particular case. She found out that she was at risk. She had the BRCA mutation. She found out that she was at risk. And as many of you know, took some, I think, very aggressive, good steps to keep herself healthy. Actually had bilateral mastectomies and eventually bilaterally taking out her ovaries and her tubes. And in a good way. She's still gorgeous, she's still smart, and most of all, she's healthy and she's alive. And she has taken that, like I said, because she had the ability to know her family history and know what steps she could take. So within this, many of you have heard about BRCA1 or BRCA2, or some people call them BRCA1 and BRCA2. I don't know if you can remember this. You probably don't really think about this too much, but as a geneticist, one of the things I was concerned about for many years is that that testing was available, but it was really expensive. And by really expensive, if you can think back to this, 10 years ago, how much do you think that test cost? If you were paying out of pocket for that test, what do you think? Okay, so I heard a bunch of different numbers, and I heard close to the right numbers here. It was close to a $4,000 test for having the full test in terms of doing this. By comparison, and I'll explain why in a second, by comparison, that same test, how much do you think that costs today? Okay, so I heard one little low ball in there, but but I did hear a lot of the right numbers, depending on how sophisticated you are as a shopper in terms of doing this, and depending on exactly where your family comes from, can be in the neighborhood of anywhere from about $99 to about $250. So tremendously less expensive. And the reason it was much less expensive was what I call my Don Quixote experiment. I really had no idea that this would work. I thought I was really just sort of battling windmills. But to make a long story short, I was very upset that many of my patients couldn't get access to that testing 10 years ago because $4,000 was a lot of money for people. And so I said, you know what? The reason why it's $4,000 is because there were patents on genes. There were these things in terms of being able to say, I own this gene, and if you want to get tested and know your information for this gene, you have to pay me, and you can only pay me. And you may or may not know this, but I was besides being a biochemistry major as an undergraduate, I was also an economics major. And I realized that the reason for that was because there was a monopoly, right? There was one laboratory performing testing, and so they could set the price, and they set the price very high, and that was why we were in that market situation. So I started whispering to people in the government. I said, this isn't really fair. And they said, well, you know what? We're going to let you have some congressional testimony on this. So I thought this was a big deal, right? I thought this is like, when you see it in the news, you're out there giving congressional testimony, there are a room full of photographers, and everyone's interested in this. So we did this. We marched to Washington. We actually convened this meeting, and there were a lot of very bright, extremely bright, but very young congressional staffers in the room. Not a single congressman or senator. But what I didn't realize at the time was that this gets into the congressional minutes in terms of this, and I still don't understand why, but the folks at the ACLU decided to read that, and they thought this was a matter of free speech. I still don't exactly get that one, but this was a matter of free speech, and they thought that this was a very important thing to be able to bring forward. And very long story short, we decided that amongst the genes that were patented, the ones that would have the biggest public impact were actually BRCA1 and 2, because of the women and men that get breast, ovarian, pancreatic cancer is associated with this. And very long story short is this eventually went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and as many of you know, it overturned the ability to patent genes. For any of you that... So for any of you that can explain this to me, you can look at the stock for Myriad Genetics, which was the one laboratory that owns this. Right when that announcement came out, their stock price actually went up. I still don't understand that one. But anyway, eventually came down because what we were able to do with that is now to democratize this, now to open this up so that many, many laboratories could compete in a good way. We have been able to, for the public, take for the same, actually not even the same price. You guys just told me it's really a tenth of the price, and be able to get 10 times the information. And so with that now, this is something that's very much accessible to men, women, those with a family history, without a family history, and been able to go well beyond just BRCA1 and 2. But now many of you may know that we can actually test for even as many as 50 genes at a single time that tell us not just about one type of cancer, but tell us about many, many different types of cancers. So the reason I say this is because some of you actually got testing in the days of BRCA 1 and 2, and you thought to yourself, oh, I was getting breast or ovarian cancer testing. My testing was negative at that time. So this is the news flash for you. If the testing was negative, and if we did not understand why your family, you or someone else in your family got cancer at that time, it's time actually for an update, because we now have much better testing. Number one, it's much better because we've got much better methods to look at our genes, much better because there are many more genes that we can look at, and much better because it's much less expensive, and so people can access it. Access it either because your insurance company is paying for it, in rare circumstances because we have people that end up paying some other way for it, but it is time to be able to get that updated information, because whether it be for you, we want to make sure that we keep you healthy, and that if you've had cancer, you don't go back and get cancer again, and also more importantly, or as importantly, I should say, for your family, that you can actually be the person to give hugely helpful information to other people in your family, be it, as I said, your brother, your sister, your kids, your grandchildren, but that information can be incredibly empowering and incredibly important. I personally am a believer that knowledge is power, that if you know what it is that you need to avoid, you can take steps to avoid that. They don't have to be things that are sort of life-changing or life-altering in a bad way, but simply by being vigilant, knowing what to be careful about, knowing how to be screened, when to be screened, with whom to be screened, all of that information can be life-saving. As we've done that, I'll also say that I don't know if any of you thought you got screened, but if anyone thought they got screened by doing a 23andMe test, who's heard about 23andMe? Okay, so if any of you thought you got screened for any of the cancer genes by 23andMe, you could have. So if you're Jewish, the BRCA1 and BRCA2 genes for Jewish individuals are included in that test, and it actually ends up being a very good test for that. If you're anyone else, so either if you're not Jewish or there are any other type of cancer you're worried about, that test is completely and utterly useless for you, except that you may be able to find out where your ancestors were from. You may be able to find out a long-lost distant cousin or something like that, but it will not help you for the genetic information itself. So just word to the wise and warning for that. You, too, might think about cancer testing, but not the 23andMe type. So these are the genes that we call genetic genes. So for anyone who wasn't awake, now you know. So these are the genes that we know for 2019 that are very powerful genes. So what I mean by that is when we talk about that, some of these genes confer a risk of, no kidding, 60, 70, 80% chance of developing some type of cancer over your lifetime. These are cancers that can be preventable, but they are no joke in terms of this. There are other genes that are genetic. And what I mean by that is some of those genes, they're wimpier genes. They may confer something like a 10% risk of cancer or a 15% risk of cancer. And you can imagine if you're Angelina Jolie, you're making a different decision if you think you've got a 70% risk of breast cancer as opposed to if you think you've got a 10% risk of breast cancer, right? So part of what we're doing, and this is now the next frontier, is actually the research to try and identify the genetic factors that we still don't know, as well as many of those genetic factors, which are actually much more common as we look out at individuals. And it's going to take a little time. We're for sure not there yet, but as we're doing this, we are banding together. And so these become international studies to be able to understand this, to bring the power to these. These genetic studies, believe it or not, they're not just studies of 100 people or 1,000 people. These are now studies that get up to be like 200,000 individuals. We have things like the Breast Cancer Family Registry, the Colon Cancer Family Registry, the Pancreas Family Registry, all of these things. And one of the things we're starting to realize is that when you thought you had a colon cancer gene, we now know from work that we've done that also confers risk of breast cancer. So it's not just because it's colon, but there are mixtures in understanding between cancer genes over here and conferring different genes over here. And even if you didn't see that cancer in your family, it might not be that it's not going to come up for the first time in the next generation. And so in a good way, though, again, we're empowering people in terms of what cancer do you need to worry about? When in your life do you need to worry about it? And more importantly, what can you do to take care of it? So I'm just going to wrap up by saying things are changing. There is a lot still of work to be done. For those of you that are interested in helping the next generation for knowledge to be power, I encourage you, when it's convenient, when it's possible, participate in research. It's important to be able to come up with the answers for tomorrow for the questions we still have today. But as this is changing, times are changing very rapidly. Continue reading what you're seeing in the New York Times. It is helping you to keep you up to date with this, but things are changing rapidly, and if we don't have answers for you today, I surely hope we have answers for you tomorrow. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Dr. Chung. We are now going to open it up to questions, and I have Monica and Mercedes who will be at the opposite sides of the room with microphones. So if you can raise your hand if you have a question, they'll come to you and give you the microphone so everyone can hear your question. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I have an adopted daughter from China, and because she has no knowledge of her genetic history, and she's 22 now, I'm wondering at what stage she should have any form of testing, either the BRCA test or any other form of genetic testing.
Yeah. So it's very timely because I just came back from being in Beijing and being in China on Wednesday. So I have a very good sense now of what current genetics are in China. So there are a couple things. The first question is, let me ask you this. What do you think the cost now is? Well, let me rephrase that. How much do you think it cost us to sequence the human genome the first time? The first human genome, what did that cost? $3 billion. What do you think it cost me for the last human genome I sequenced? $99. Not quite. But close, $999. Okay. Now, how much did it cost me to understand that information? I'm still not there yet, but it cost us about $10,000 truly to understand that information. So it's all about you. So for your daughter in particular, one of the things this is no joke, I went to China about was specifically because our ability to understand the Chinese genome, as opposed to, for instance, an Italian genome or a Finnish genome, we are far behind right now. And in part, one of the messages to give you is that for different, the four corners of the world, if I were to cover that, I have to know what looks normal in those communities to know what looks different. And right now, I can sort of talk to you offline about this. One of the limitations is that for China, they actually will not allow genetic information to come out of the country. And so one of the things we're doing is actually working with Chinese investigators to make sure they learn faster within the constraints that the Chinese government has given us. So the bottom line to your answer is she's only 22 at this point. So I'm not really worried about her breast or other cancer risks really for about the next decade reasonably. By the time she gets to a point where we start worrying about risks, and by the time she's starting to do things like planning her family and what she wants to do about children, I will have this one for you, I promise. So within that period of time, we will be able to get her genome sequenced and understand it, and I bet you it's going to be for about $500. So for now, just told her to just be a young person, enjoy life, don't worry about these things, and I've got this one.
Thank you. Hi, I'm just curious, as far as getting genetic testing, where and how that's done these days. I mean, I know in the past you had to go to a genetic counselor and set up a separate appointment. Is it any more accessible through your regular doctor or OBGYN or?
Yep. So the answer is a very good question. So the logistics of this are that any physician is capable of ordering the genetic testing for you. And I actually think an informed consumer is a good person in this. If you have a doctor, and it can be anything from an internist to an OBGYN, in theory can help you with this. I will tell you that some of them either don't feel comfortable or don't understand this information well enough, and so they won't feel comfortable ordering the test for you that you need to. Certainly genetic counselors, cancer centers in general, so many oncologists are much more comfortable with this, even though you don't have cancer necessarily in terms of that. Worst case scenario, and I'm sorry I don't have a business card or something to give you. Literally, Google me, find my email account. I will personally tell you and connect you with someone in terms of being able to do this. It is not quite as easy as you can just go up to 23andMe and order a kit, but we are trying to get it much, much easier, much more accessible. You can get results in about 3 weeks, so it doesn't take that much time in terms of doing it. We have figured out ways to do it even from saliva samples, so you don't even have to, if you're afraid of needles, you don't even have to get blood draws anymore. So we've taken away some of the obstacles, but you will need to connect with a physician to be able to order the testing for you.
I'm a little confused in terms of BRCA1, BRCA2, and full genetic testing. If you go in for a BRCA1, BRCA2, are you getting the whole deal or just part?
Yeah, so if you literally go in for BRCA1 and BRCA2, you are only getting BRCA1 and BRCA2. Many people these days, when they're going in for we'll call it a panel of genes or a number of genes for cancer, they're going well beyond BRCA1 and BRCA2. To me, that's the current standard of care, is to go well beyond BRCA1 and BRCA2. But the standard of care, I would say 4 years or more ago, was only to do BRCA1 and BRCA2. And so if your testing was done in that era, it's time for a refresh, time for an update. And do the whole thing.
Hi. This question is kind of related to a previous question, but in a family where there already is abnormal BRCA gene, what age should children be tested, and should it be a different age for daughters and sons?
Very good question. Okay, so for those of you who already know you're at increased risk, and I'm going to say specifically in a use case for BRCA1 or BRCA2, we really don't see any cancers before the age of 25, and so in terms of thinking about that, I don't personally recommend testing before age 25 unless someone gets really anxious and nervous about this. We definitely don't recommend testing for children, so for individuals aged less 18. We feel like people ought to make their own decisions, and they ought to be able to get their heads around making those decisions. For men, the cancer risks really don't begin before 45, and so to your point, if you're a guy, you don't, for your own personal health, I don't think you really have to before 45. I will say it's something that's very, very individualized, but certain couples think about whether or not they want to prune their family tree. So whether or not when they're having children, they worry about passing this on to their children. And it's something I can talk about if people have questions, but for that, obviously, for a gentleman, if he's younger than 45, he needs to know his status for that issue.
As a wine lover, there was a recent article in the Times, I believe the study came out of the UK, regarding the influence that alcohol has on cancer. And I was just curious, the end of the article, I guess the synopsis was that zero alcohol is best. I'm just curious what alcohol does to the expression of genes and any more current information that you have.
Yeah. So from a very practical point of view, I don't worry at all for someone who's having one drink a day. So one glass of wine, a beer, whatever, I think that's perfectly fine. The thing that gets complicated is I think you have to consider all your health risks in total. So I think you have to consider, I don't know, at least I worry about cancer. I also worry about heart disease. I worry about Alzheimer's. I worry about the whole package of things. And for me, the balance is, as I said, if you want to drink, drinking one drink a day, I think is very reasonable and helps with that entire risk profile for all of your health. We do know clearly if you're going to either binge drink or if you're going to do a lot of alcohol, 3-4 glasses, per day, clearly you're going to have other health risks that go with that. But in terms of that as a general sort of off the cuff thing, that's a general sort of good rule to live by.
Hi. I'm asking a question about a young man who is 41 who has no female relatives to test, but has a 16-month daughter. So can men have the BRCA tests, or how do they go about it?
Okay, very good. So very specifically, men obviously, so with the BRCA gene, BRCA1 and 2, or any genes that have to do with breast cancer, ovarian cancer, even though men don't usually get breast cancer, they can with BRCA2 specifically. And importantly, they can still transmit the gene just as strongly to their daughters as a woman can, right? And so if you're thinking about your family history, don't disregard your father's family history, ladies. Your father's family history is just as important as your mother's family history, right? So now the thing that I think about for your 41-year-old young man that you're talking about, and I do this calculation in my head, what does his family history look like? You know, in terms of what's the likelihood that he carries, whether it's BRCA1 or another gene, what is his ancestry? If he's Jewish, there is a higher likelihood. Also, if he's from Iceland, there's a higher likelihood. If there are certain parts of Germany, there's a higher likelihood. But we think about all of those things together. There is a movement afoot for people to think about even a healthy adult screen. So you may not think about this too much, but we think about from a genetic point of view, at what point would we go to what I call population-based screening? So not just because of your family history, because for reasons we've heard about today, some people may be adopted, some people may not know their family history, some people it may be that there's a dearth of women, and then that's why we don't see a particular family history. So we've talked about once we can get the price of testing down low enough, once we can know how to interpret the information well enough and quickly enough to even have something like a $100 test that would think about your history or look at your risk factors, genetic risk factors for breast cancer, ovarian cancer, uterine cancer, colon cancer, even familial hypercholesterolemia or heart attacks, but being able to do that. And so there are some pilot studies that are being done right now in California to actually see how well that works, how scalable that is. And at some point, we'll have to decide. It's still going to be an individual choice, but whether or not both men and women would be included within that and how much we can do in terms of improving health. So watch for that. My prediction is within the next 5 years, that's going to actually be a thing in terms of a large number of people, both having that as an affordable, accessible way to think about keeping themselves healthy.
Yes, I have two questions, one related to me and one related to my daughter. Mm-hmm. I was BRCA positive and I went through ovarian, surgery and chemotherapy and everything. So do you think I need to do the rest of the thing now?
What is the rest of the thing that you mean?
You said, even if you've had the BRCA testing, but beyond that,
the other genes.
Yeah.
I think probably we could talk offline, but I think you've probably found your answer already. So I think you're probably good as you are. I think you probably don't need the additional testing I talked about.
Okay, and the other thing is about my daughter. She had a testing done when she was 40 and it was negative, but now she's 52. You think she might want to go for another testing now? Because we have a very, very bad history of breast cancer and leukemia and all that on both sides of the family.
Yeah. So for anyone in the group or anyone who knows of someone who already has a mutation identified in one of these genes, what we usually do is we sit down with you and figure out if that mutation seems to explain the cancers in the people in the family who had cancer. Most families do not have two genes. And so for most people, one is enough. And my guess is in your family, probably that one explains it. For other family members that then get tested for that specific gene, if it's negative once, it will be negative forever. It's not going to change. They are simply done. And so for your daughter, the good news is even though she's your daughter, she doesn't have this gene from you, and so she is not going to be at any higher risk than if we go out here on the street and pull someone off the street, no higher risk of breast cancer, uterus cancer, anything else than anyone else should have.
Okay, thank you very much.
I'd like to know the other genes that you had indicated that we should look for, that young people should look for?
Yeah, so I'm glad to rattle them off to you. They might not make too much sense, but MSH2, MLL1, PMS2 are some of the genes that we do in terms of these Lynch syndrome genes for breast cancer. There are things like P10, P53, PALB2. It sounds like, someone once told me, it sounds like you're from Star Wars. It sounds like R2-D2 to me in terms of all of this. So anyway, there's a lot of mumbo jumbo in that. The bottom line is that you can, even if you just Google, and I'm not here representing any company in terms of doing it, but if you Google, there are 3 laboratories that offer, I think, or maybe 4 laboratories that offer some good testing. So you can look at Myriad, Color, Ambry, GeneDx. All 4 of those laboratories are very good, robust genetic testing laboratories, and all of them have very good patient-facing materials for patient education. And again, I'm not pushing any one of the laboratories. Look and see what works well for you.
Hi, my mother had eye cancer, which is very rare, and breast cancer, and I had breast cancer 30 years ago. What do I do, and how do I, with my family, my children, how do I go about taking care of all of this information?
Yeah, so a lot of what I said actually applies to you. I don't know if your mom had melanoma in terms of an eye cancer, ocular melanoma, or something else. There are some things that put those together, and again, your family, you in particular, would be a good person to do that expanded testing now. I will say one other thing I probably neglected to mention. The best person in the family to test is to start with testing someone who's had cancer themselves, because we're answering the question, why did you develop cancer? And then to use that information to other people in the family to help advise, are they at the same risk for cancer, just like you had your daughter tested. So you can talk with me afterwards, but if you get that expanded testing, that'll take care of it for your family.
Thank you.
Can I ask you a question? Hi. Well, it was a fabulous talk, and congratulations on what you've done. And I was totally behind you until you got through the bracket 2 section. And then I kind of wonder if another point of view I want to ask you, because I was a cancer researcher myself. I'm retired for some time now. But what's bothered me about this is that this precision medicine thing, even though the cost has come down, is far from cheap, right? And these other cancer genes, these low-level ones that you may know much more than I knew at the time I retired, but the risks from these things are small, and population-wide very small, and the cost is enormous. So this is, in a way, a research project on a grand scale, which is terrific for the 1%. I call it medicine for the 10%. But, in this country, 50% of cancer deaths are preventable by proven methods. And so I sort of wonder, when it's a socioeconomic thing almost, is it reasonable to, because the precision medicine that's done on tumors, for example, all hospitals have to sequence every tumor, has produced almost no positive results. It turned out such a tiny fraction have actionable mutations, and such a tiny fraction of those respond to extend life and so forth. So I was very with you with the cost effectiveness and so forth. But cancer has become almost an industry. Right. And I question this level of precision for a reward that we're getting from it for the cost. And I'd just love to hear what you think about it. Yeah.
So I think there are 2 different questions embedded here, and I'm going to speak to you at a slightly higher level, and I apologize. Other folks tell me if I get too obtuse. So I'm going to first answer the question about heritable factors, so things that are coming in that you're at risk for. So let me be clear, when I was screaming, I promise I won't scream at you, but I was screaming out genetics. Those are the things that are very high risk, and there are now about 50 genes that we routinely screen for that are very high risk, that are not the sort of low risk things. The low risk things are things that truly are on a research basis at this point, but when you start aggregating not just one low risk, but now start aggregating many low risks and come up with something we call a polygenic risk score, that risk conferred, that composite risk conferred for those at the upper decile can be as high as the high risk genes. So within this, and I apologize in terms of being a little obtuse, but that is totally on a research basis right now, but the right now in 2 years becomes, current. And so I'm just trying to give you sort of foreshadowing of the things that are coming in the future, and some of you that don't have answers today, you may have answers tomorrow. I think that's the point that I was trying to make. Within this, I think the whole ability to make this cost effective, and I worry a lot about cost effectiveness, is to really be able to drive down the cost of sequencing and drive down the cost of interpretation. And just to give you one example of this with something that's not related to cancer at all, but for a different different condition in babies, we actually have a policy, a way of being able to screen all newborn babies now in the United States for a specific genetic condition where it costs us 11 cents per baby. So there are ways, there are technologies to be able to drive down the cost in terms of the testing and scale them in terms of population health. And at the end of the day, that is something that I want to be able to do. And it's actually not just going to be cancer, but it's going to be population health in toto. And it is going to be way, way down from where we are now. So I'm with you. And I do think about our healthcare dollars a lot. And as I said, having just come back from China and realizing what you have to do from population health in now a population way, way bigger than even what we are in the United States and do it equitably, we have to be able to do better than where we are now. That's for sure. The tumors are a bit different in terms of that, and I agree with you as well. I do think in terms of the tumor sequencing, and many of you seen this because like Sloan Kettering's been all over the news recently with some of this. It definitely is not at the point where it's providing hugely improved care, improved outcomes, things like that. There are a very small number of people who truly have a transformational approach, but it's a very small number at this point. I think the thing that becomes tough is trying to decide for yourself, am I going to be one of those 1 in 1,000 that's going to have something really important? And, I don't want to miss my opportunity is the situation I feel like people are in right now. On the other hand, I do think there are ways of being able to do very targeted testing, literally for a small number of dollars, like literally less than $20 in terms of the things that are actionable that make a huge difference, and be able to scale that for people with cancer. I think there's been a little bit of confusion between what's research and what's clinical care at this point. And institutions, large institutions, want to perform research on clinical care dollars, and I think that's where some of the confusion has come right now. So it's tough, and I appreciate everyone just wants the best for themselves and their patients, but it does get confusing.
We're going to take 2 more questions, so Monica and Mercedes, we can both find someone for the last questions.
Hi. I have metastatic breast cancer, and they did the testing on me with the original tissue, and then I recently had a recurrence, and they did more testing on that tissue. So how will that work with insurance? Because will they limit how many times they can do the genetic testing? Because obviously, I don't know if the mutations, they're different.
Right.
And I don't know what my future holds, so I didn't know if there becomes a limit on testing.
So with this, and I realize this is incredibly confusing, when we talk about genetic testing in the cancer, it's very different than when we talk in genetic testing for the whole person, right? So what's going on with genetic cancer or genetic testing in the cancer is the cancer can change over time. And in particular, the metastasis can change over time. And so you're chasing trying to figure out how that cancer is working and how to outsmart it. Insurance companies, if they're going to pay, they should pay for each time you need to because your cancer is changing and evolving. Now, whether or not insurance companies agree to continue doing that, that ends up being a policy decision that's way over my head. But in theory, that's a very different question from them in terms of, I had this panel of genes today and I want to have the same panel of genes tomorrow. That they should not pay for because your genes haven't changed for yourself over time, and that they will not continue to pay for again and again. But again, the cancer itself, that is evolving, that's changing, and there may be new things you find in a metastasis that you didn't find in the primary.
I'm wondering if someone is to get this test and finds out that they are, I kind of have a 2-part question. So you find out you are genetically at risk for some kind of cancer. The benefit of knowing that is simply perhaps, am I missing anything that now I can start looking for it and screening, and if there's anything perhaps I can do, I could be doing it. And then conversely, if I don't come up with anything, does that mean, whew, I'm in the clear?
So 2 parts to the question. So if you do find out that you're at increased risk, the hope is that we can figure out very specifically what you're at increased risk for, when in your lifetime you're at increased risk for that, and then what can we do to minimize that risk, either because of screening, either because of medicines or surgeries in certain cases. But we can give you some advice that's now all about you in terms of that risk. When you come out negative, it's actually a two-part question again. Part of it depends on not just you, but the rest of your family. So is anyone else in your family positive? The combination of them being positive and you being negative actually is a better thing for you, because it means that you may not, just like this young lady here, your daughter didn't inherit your mutation. That means she's at lower risk, right? That situation ends up being better for your daughter in the sense that she doesn't have the cancer risk that you had. If no one in the family has come up with an answer, it lowers your risk, because we know now many of the genes we can cross off the list, but it may not make your risk 0 or the average person, because your family could have a mutation in a gene that we just haven't figured out yet. And so if there is still a family history of cancer that we can't explain, then we say your screening should be based on what we see in your family. So if we still see unexplained, if you will, colon cancer, we want to do the colonoscopies, because that absolutely is something we can nip in the bud and we can prevent colon cancer in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chung. Thank you all so much for coming, and I hope you have a great day.